This video is brought to you by Hegel.
Hegel. It really doesn't have the same ring to it.
No, you gotta whisper like Hegel.
Even then, like, it just Hegel.
Okay, anyways,
Yeah.
Welcome back to the One Bit Podcast. This is the 6th episode, I believe. Today we're gonna be discussing some of the equipment and speakers, that Sean and I disagree on. But before we get onto that, and before Sean explains his position on many of the things that he disagrees with me on, we have now the One Bit merch. This is the mug that I got. So check out in the description below for our One Bit merch. I have vitamin water in this right now.
I don't even have One Bit merch. Not yet.
Yeah, you gotta pick what you want.
Yeah.
Also, this is not part of the One Bit merch, but this is the tube copper finish coaster. So anyways, check the description for our merch. So Sean,
Yes.
what is we doing today? What is
we doing? Well,
what is you disagree?
We're doing a video on the times when we disagree about either brands or products. Because we've known each other for a long time. We've experienced a lot of the same products. And even though I would say most of the time we more or less hear the same thing, we don't always hear the same thing.
Yeah.
And even sometimes when we do hear the same thing, we walk away with a totally different impression about whether or not we like or dislike something.
Right.
So this video is going to be our chance to just hash it out. We're going to go over 2 brands and 3 products to where we just don't necessarily see completely on the same page.
Yeah. So this should be this should be a pretty entertaining video. I'll link I'll put the timestamps below for you guys to skip through to the brands that you're interested in hearing, because this is gonna be probably a long video.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So why don't we start off with a couple brands that you really like that I don't dislike, but I've never been quite as enthusiastic as you have. And the first one is KEF loudspeakers. So Jay, why do you like KEF so much? It's got to be a story behind it.
Well, I like that they do very good engineering.
Mm-hmm.
If you see how KEF does their engineering, they use a lot of softwares as well as real life testing, and they're kind of going for that kind of balanced sound, right? That neutrality. I mainly like it because of that neutral character. Like the KEF LS50 was a hot product. Now a lot of people have mixed feelings about it, but I'm on the camp that it's a good speaker. Like you need good power behind it. But I especially like it for my desktop setup, because it's a dual concentric design like the LS50 Metas and the original LS50s, and they can be set on the desktop and have very coherent imaging right down the center, even with a big monitor between it. Now I use a 48-inch OLED TV from LG, so that large surface area is going to bring some compromises. So with virtually any speaker I've tried, other than dual concentric designs, I found that that phantom center is not really locked in place with such a big monitor between them. So there's some advantages to a dual concentric design. And I tend to be a fan of what dual concentric designs bring to the table.
Sure. So what is about, KEF in particular? Is there like a certain sound though? Because there are quite a few dual concentric designs out there. So why, like, say an LS50 Meta over like a Unify from ELAC? Yeah,
so first of all, it's just a really good height. It's a single driver, right? Well, it's a single dual concentric design. And I also like the look as well, especially the copper driver finish. And in terms of sound, like I said, it's very neutral. It does have a little bit of bite on that upper mid range. And some people may not like that, but for me, in my desktop setup, which I admittedly do EQ to be perfectly flat to my ears and to the measurements and so on, because when it comes to my desktop, it's very different from my stereo. For my stereo, I want to enjoy the music, so I'll go for a colored sound sometimes, warm, whatever. But when it comes to desktop, I tend to go for neutrality because I need to make sure that what we're recording, for example, like it's going to sound good and reasonable across multiple different devices. And for that, I need to be able to discern any noise and level differences, pretty accurately.
Okay, so for you as a matter of use case, specifically with like, say,
application
LS50 Meta, would you ever use a KEF speaker for your main stereo speaker?
With certain components only.
Okay.
And that's kind of my stance on it, is that KEF speakers tend to sound really good with Hegel integrated amplifiers, and that has nothing to do with the sponsorship. I've talked about this multiple times before.
Yeah.
Hegel is a good match with Magnepan and KEF speakers, and so with KEF and Hegel, I would definitely consider using it as an entertainment setup for my stereo.
Okay. Fair enough. So I guess now it's my turn to talk about why I have kind of a different take.
Sure.
Right? And bear in mind, there's no right or wrong here. It's just a difference of opinion. So before I begin, first and foremost, I do respect KEF as a company, right? The people, especially in North America, that I've interacted with have been great. And I actually don't dislike their products. In fact, I think their products are really good when you consider how they position themselves, which is KEF positions themselves as being a tech company, right? That is like their whole MO is like, we're a high-tech company. And I think, what you hear is a very high-tech sound, very focused on detail. Mid-range is focused on speed, good off-axis performance as you'd expect from a coaxial design, all those different things. So the reason why I don't care for it is purely subjective, which is I just don't like the sound of KEF speakers. I think they're a little too forward for my taste. And I feel like the cone material that's used, which is a mix of metal and plastic and sometimes paper, depending on the exact driver, it sounds tonally plasticky to my ears. Like, it doesn't sound realistic. It's the kind of speaker to where it's very technically accomplished. Like, you listen to the detail, the micro detail and all those things. And from a intellectual perspective, I can be impressed, but it does nothing for me emotionally. Now, it's not to say I can't enjoy the sound of their speakers. I think, like you said, with the right amp, Hegel is, famously a good match. I mean, they've been partners in Europe for God knows how long now for that very reason. But I guess for me with KEF, is like, I respect the speaker, but I could never, listen to most of their products and have a genuinely good time compared to other products that I could get for the same money. I mean, even with desktop listening, it's just too forward for my taste. Like, I couldn't do what you do and make choices, based off of, what I'm hearing from the speakers. It would still be too upper mid-range, too treble centric for me to be useful. But, I think also that's just a part of it, is when you're in that application for studio use, it's more about familiarity than anything else, but that's a side topic. So that's my take on KEF, man.
Emotional, damn it.
Cool. I think, I think we agree on the sound aspect. Just a matter of difference in opinion if it's something useful for each individual.
Yeah. So the next one, today's sponsor of the video,
Hegel. Yeah, we disagree on Hegel quite a bit, I think. Yeah,
I think we do. Although I think I've come around to Hegel, which I'll talk about in a moment. But first, I want to hear why you like Hegel so much. Because, I mean, since I've known you, you are a major Hegel fanboy.
Yeah, so I think I can as far as my recollection goes, when I used to work at that store that sold high-end stuff, I was like, often when you work at a store, reps will drop off products so that you can test it out and hopefully carry the brand, right? And so Hegel was one of those products. The rep brought it in for us to test out, and honestly, it was a black box. Like, that's one thing about Hegel, is that it's not a very blingy piece. It's not like Accuphase, it's not like Macintosh. It doesn't have like a bling factor. It's just a black box.
Yeah.
And so naturally, like, it was like on the side on a rack, and it was never touched for a very long time. And then finally, one of my coworkers actually paired it with the Magnepan LRS at the time, which was a pairing that we have been having trouble finding a good match. We like to kind of make, little packages for entry level like that, right? Magnepan being a speaker, LRS being a speaker under a grand at the time.
Yeah.
We wanted something that people can buy simply and enjoy the music. And we have trouble finding an all-in-one that does that. Even an integrated, it was notoriously hard to find a good match. Like, getting loud is one thing, but like the coherency of the sound is another. So long story short, he hooked it up. I walked in and I was like, and I'm a big Magnepan fan as well. So I've had many Magnepans at this point. And of course, the store carried it, so I heard virtually every model and got to play around with many, many different matchings. I've never heard Magnepan's better. Even to this day, people ask me, is it still Magnepan the choice, with Hegel? And my answer is yes. To this day, I still think Hegel is one of the best matches with Magnepan speakers. So that's when I was like really excited, because the original H90 actually was not that expensive. And as a package, was it like $3,000, $4,000 Canadian, right? For a system, $3,000, $4,000 Canadian, it was an excellent system. And we sold tons of that system with a lot of satisfied customers. So with certain speakers like KEF and Magnepan, I find Hegel to present something of a great value because it's such a good synergy and all-in-one with a streamer, DAC, preamplifier, amplifier. You just have to add speaker cables to it. I just thought it was a great product because of that. I enjoy the sound as well.
And you still feel that way? I mean,
yes.
So because you obviously fell in love with them early on.
Yeah.
So I think the question is, does that love still hold? And it does.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for me, Hegel, it took me time to realize that I wasn't really the target audience for Hegel products, right? I've always been this purist 2-channel enthusiast. I don't stream, and I don't care about built-in DACs, especially since most of the time built-in DACs are pretty cheap. So when I got in some Hegel integrated amps, is the 120 and the 360 or the 390? I forgot what you call it. But anyways.
390.
Okay. So when I got in both of those integrated amps, the 120 I immediately understood just because I had many other products in that same category that were targeting the same audience. And I was like, okay, the 120 is kind of the spicy boy of the Hegel lineup, but it still has that Hegel sound. And I totally get it. I get why some people love it. I get why some people hate it, but I think it's good for the money. Like, it competes very evenly against everyone else. But the big boy that they sent me, right, 390, that's when I was just like, man, I'm struggling here. In fact, one of the guys from Hegel visited my area, and we were hanging out, walking along at the beach, and I just had a very honest conversation with them. I was like, look, the 120 I think is good, but the 390 I'm struggling with, because for the same amount of money at the time, this is a couple years ago, for the same amount of money, I can get an Accuphase E280, or I can get a Luxman 550. Both of those products are substantially better in terms of build quality, both in terms of materials for the casework, as well as the parts inside of the product for the same amount of money. And then subjectively, sound-wise, I feel like they're both more special and in their own way sound more realistic than the 390 does. And he took the criticism well, and his only response is like, yeah, but we have a built-in DAC and a streamer. And at the time, in my mindset, I'm like, who cares? If you have that much money to spend, then buy a separate DAC, streamer, whatever, that's going to sound better anyways, right? That was my mindset. It wasn't until a couple years later I realized that, you know what? On its own, it does have good power. It is more powerful than those two. It does have a more, well, I wouldn't say more muscular sound, but it does have a muscular sound that I think a lot of people would like, a warm sound. And because it has the built-in streaming, the built-in DAC, things I don't care about, but I've noticed that a lot of people do care about, okay, it does have a place. It does have a place. I just feel that, I think they cost a lot of money for something that's made in China, quite frankly. So I think when it comes to their higher end products, that's where I sometimes struggle. Is I think the value proposition is a little more questionable when you start to branch out beyond Hegel and you start listening to other gear. There's some really nice gear that also has streaming capability and built-in DACs. But you get a strong dealer network, you get good customer support, and that's worth something too.
Yeah, I think that point about the streamer DAC, one of the selling points with Hegel was that, with the H190, right? I found the H190 to be a sweet spot. Yeah, the upper line are progressively better, but like it's diminishing return like heavily hits, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to like something like the H190, I, often ask customers, where can you find a streamer DAC, preamplifier, amplifier, and if you were to buy all those 4 pieces separately, where can you find something that's going to come out with a sound that this Hegel integrated amplifier is producing?
Yeah.
right? So I just found it to be extremely good value. Now, of course, if you want to go much higher end, like, with the Accuphase, you're going to get a separate streamer, separate DAC, and so on. But there's also the beauty in that some people these days, right, like us crazy audiophiles may be like, who cares? We'll just go with separate. But there's a lot of individuals that live in apartments in smaller spaces, or have speakers like KEF, Magnepan, or even the Sonos Fiber Electamotor 3s, all good matches with Hegel specifically, that are like, you know what, I just want one box as a one box solution.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely a market for it, and I think in the realm of all-in-ones, it's probably one of the best and my favorite all-in-ones that I've heard thus far, and it's been absolutely a long time since I've thought that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be fair, I have found some special synergies as well. A good example being SVS and the Evolution series, right? I got into Titans and I was trying a bunch of different gear on them. And just for funsies, because I had it, I tried the 390 and I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, forget about the convenience factor. This is fantastic, to the point to where I was trying to get SVS and Hegel to work together until finally I almost had to bully them into it, like hold their heads and just like, no, you're gonna do this. And they finally decided to work together, and or at the very least start showing with products here in North America. And they're both extremely happy with it. But so there's an example to where, even compared to purist integrated solutions, synergy is a thing. And when you find it, especially with Hegel, I think you do get a really, really good listening experience. So I could see where a lot of the love comes from, especially given your background. So, yeah, I think with Hegel, we don't disagree that much on that. I think it's just a different love for the brand, maybe, but that's about it.
Yeah, and and you at the time you didn't really stream.
I still don't stream.
Still don't. Okay. No. Anyways, moving on. What's next?
Okay, so those are the brands that you like that I, haven't been as fond of. Let's move on to some products that I've liked and you just never really connected with. Let's start with IOTAVX, the SA3. For the longest time, it was about a $500 integrated amplifier. I think $400 to $500, somewhere around there. And as you well know, this is a product that I've championed for many, 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 many years. I've recommended to tons and tons of people. And it's simply because I feel like it has features and a sound that I think are useful enough to people who are stepping into something like that. And my vision of a person who's buying the IOTAVX SA3 is somebody who maybe they're stepping up from a stereo receiver or something affordable, and this is going to be their first real audio purchase. It's not extravagant, but it's good, and there's upgradability. For example, if you want more power, you spend $300 more and you double the power via the separate power amp. But I liked it because I thought it had a sound that complemented a wide variety of affordable speakers, the kind of speakers people will likely use with it. No, it's not neutral, not by any means. The bass is bumped up, the treble slightly elevated, but the mid-range is nice and warm and full sounding. And again, I felt like this amplifier, in fact, I still feel like it complements a hell of a lot of affordable speakers. But I know you don't have the same feelings about that amp.
Well, I actually don't know why this is on this list, because I do think it's a good purchase for such a at an entry level. I think it's a good purchase. But the problem that I face with that amplifier was the fact that, like you mentioned, it had good bass, has a little bit of elevation in the bass.
Yeah.
But that little bit of boost in the high frequency, I didn't see it as a good match with at least the speakers at that time, where a lot of budget speakers had that kind of V shape a little bit, right?
Yeah.
That boosted bass and boosted treble to give you that wow factor.
Yeah.
And then to add something that has a little bit of that upper energy made things more bright to my ears. And especially at the time, my friend Tujin, who is very sensitive to high frequency, he likes nothing but warm sound, right?
Yeah.
So he and I struggled to find a good match with it. And at the time, we had something like the Rotel Tribute integrated amplifier that was, to us, a more neutral match with speakers around that price point.
Yeah.
So that was the main thing, was that there were, to us, it didn't sound like it was a something that we could recommend for speakers around that price point at the time.
Yeah, and I think that's respectable, man. And I've heard the tribute. I've never reviewed it, and I do agree it is the more neutral piece. It's the cleaner sounding piece. I don't think anything in that price range really has refined treble, to be entirely honest with you. So I wouldn't call it refined, but I definitely get where you guys are coming from. But, the funny thing is, one of the top combinations I've recommended with the SA3 that people seem to love is the Triangle Berea 3 or the Bro 3. You would think it would be the worst match on planet Earth, but it's like, dude, I think for people who, again, you have to think about use case, people who are getting their first affordable high-end system, it's not as bright as Klipsch, which was, at the time, you have to bear in mind, that was like one of the most popular speakers, RP600Ms, or the ELAC DVR62 is another super popular speaker, but that was really warm to the point of, being dull to some people's ears. Like, that combo was like right in the middle between the two. Forward, yes, but not as forward as Klipsch. A little bit of warmth, but not as warm as ELAC. So that was the whole reasoning behind it. But yeah, I think you and I are still kind of on a different page with the SA3. So that's why I wanted to bring it up.
I think we did find it a good match with speakers like the original Bucard S400 Mark 1, or stuff that had like a little bit more kind of not recessed, but more chilled out high frequency. We just didn't get it. Like, no offense to people that do, but like we just couldn't get behind.
Work. Sometimes that happens, man.
Yeah, we just couldn't get behind the Triangle Bro 3 and the SA3 match, because like we found that to be not such a pleasant listening experience. And you have to understand, at the time, Tujin and I, now my taste changed. Admittedly, as you listen to more stuff, you're gonna change your taste, and as years go by, and etc. But at the time, like, Tujin and I were like we liked the sound that was almost on the dark side, let alone warm.
Yeah, I remember
so
that.
The SA3 and the Triangle Bro 3 was like a cultural shock for us. We were like, holy crap, what is this? It wasn't bright to where it was like so fatiguing, but it was like just enough to where we're like, I think we have other better pairings for our taste.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. So next one, Harbeth P3 ESR, the original, the OG.
Yeah.
There's been many variants since then, so I'm not going to refer to those at all, especially since I haven't even heard the latest XD2. Harbeth just launched that. So the original P3 ESR, I'll give you my take on why I like it so much, and you can tell me why you don't. So I like the Harbeth for a multitude of reasons. I mean, first and foremost, there's the heritage behind the brand. There's the fact that the radial driver they use is designed and made in-house. I think it's a high quality, a well-made speaker. But most importantly, I like the sound, but there's a caveat to this. I feel like the P3 ESR, when you take it for what it is, it's a very limited speaker. It's the size of a shoebox. It's a sealed design. There's only so much that little speaker is going to do. But the reason why I like it is I use it in a desktop environment where you don't need efficiency. You don't need big full range sound. And because the speakers are so close to my ears, I don't need, forward treble or anything like that to hear the details. So because of that, I get to enjoy the best thing about it, in my opinion, which is very natural sounding mid-range. Incredibly natural sounding mid-range. In a desktop environment, the bass is pretty strong due to wall reinforcement and all that. And the detail to me is good enough. In a more of a traditional 2-channel system, I'm not sure I would use it. But in a small room like mine, as long as you're not listening at loud volumes, I still think it's okay. I still think it has plenty of detail, although not delivered in a way a traditional hi-fi speaker delivers it. But yeah, it's a speaker that I just really like and plan on keeping forever, so long as I keep using it in the desktop environment. And it's been my choice over literally dozens of very expensive studio monitors, as well as hi-fi speakers. So yeah, it's a speaker I really like, but can't recommend all the time due to its limited use case. So you can go ahead and tell me why you absolutely hate it.
So first of all, my experience is weird, and I have to admit that I have never heard it on a desktop setup.
Yeah.
I've only heard it in like a near field-ish setup.
Mm-hmm.
So we had few Harbeth speakers that was brought into the store as a consignment piece.
Yeah.
We were never Harbeth dealers. So I listened to the Harbeth speakers, a few models, and I didn't like any of them. They were a little bit different, all a little bit different. So I may end up finding one that I like in the future. But so far, I have to say I've never been a fan of Harbeth. So let's put that out there.
Why is that? Like, what is it about all their speakers that you're just like, that's not for me?
It just didn't click with me. Compared to like Wilson Audio or speakers that we had like Sonos Faber, even the lower line like the Soneto series that I don't even like, it just sounded more fuller and richer and more full in the mid-range, better detail, better imaging, better separate. It just I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the gear that we were running it with, but Harbeth speakers in general just sounded hazy to me, and I think that's the word. It's like it sounded too hazy for my liking. It was like,
all right,
if I were gonna buy a modern speaker like Harbeth, I very much think I was gonna get better kind of representation of that kind of sound with vintage speakers like older JBLs, older Tannoys. That's the kind of the world I come from at the time, especially. So I didn't see any kind of merit in me personally buying a Harbeth speaker.
Okay,
right. So with the Harbeth P3 ESR, when we first got it in, I was excited because I heard all this kind of positivity from Sean, and some of my friends as well. And so we hooked it up immediately. And my first thought was, oh God, the tweeter's gone. Right. This is funny. This is funny too, because opposed to this goes against what Sean was hearing as well as the measurements. The measurements even suggest, that it has a little bit of elevation in the high frequency. So it should have plenty of detail, but I was getting none.
Yeah.
In fact, the mid-range and the high upper mid-range was hazy. We even, opened up the speaker to make sure the crossover was okay, like the tweeter was playing. And we even tried to take, like rough measurements to make sure that it was okay, right?
Yeah.
And it sounded, and it worked, it worked normal, but it sounded absolutely terrible.
Yeah, just muffled to you guys.
Like muffled, like something. And so we're going through multiple troubleshooting, like is it out of phase and whatever. But at the end of the day, it was confirmed that it was as it should be. And when we paired it up with multiple different amplifiers, usually like high power transistor amplifiers that work well with it, it sounded reasonable. But I'm like thinking to myself, okay, there's this small, tiny sealed bookshelf speaker that needs tons of power to get to reasonable sound quality. And with virtually anything lower than, like what at the time what we had was like 10 grand and up that we were pairing up with Canadian dollars. And so anything lower than that, it just it sounded muted, hazy. So I just didn't vibe with it. Nobody in the store did really.
Yeah.
And so that was my experience. I mean, it's very limited experience. It wasn't in my space or anything like that. It's just in passing. But that demo session did make me not purchase it. Because up to that point, if you remember, every other week I was bothering you. I was like, maybe I should buy one. And you're like, you shouldn't buy shit. I'm like, I think I should buy one, like blind. Like, no, you should listen to it first. But it looks so nice. And I do like the look because, I'm a big fan of the LS35A, which is what that speaker is based off of, right? So maybe one day I'll try it on my desktop, but I go for that neutrality, and the speaker isn't a neutral speaker for a desktop application.
No, not
either.
the original, at least. I do know there's been some big voicing changes to the P3 over the past 2 iterations, to the point to where the distributor actually, the previous distributor reached out to them to cover the XD, and they were like, okay. We could send it to you, but it is not what you know. Like, it is very different. It's more open, more airy, more detailed. The bass, you might think there's no bass at all. So like real quick, but you're like, it's like an electrostat. It's not like the previous, right?
I might give it another try. I mean, honestly, like I said, it was very limited experience for me.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's fair though, and I could see in definitely an environment like a store, especially a bigger open room, it would get swallowed by that room. That's not what it was even made to perform well in. At least the original P3, right?
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. And to the point about sounding muted, it was funny because when that speaker was launched, it took years for dealers to even realize that was a metal dome tweeter by CS and not a soft dome, because it has that cloth cover and it sounds like a soft dome tweeter to most people, at least. So, but yeah, no, the Harbeth P3 is definitely limited in what it can do and what it can do well. And some people are just never going to like it, period, the end. So I think it's valid. Next, and I think this may be last on the list, a speaker that I like that you never really vibed with, or at least not as much as I did, and that is the Dynaudio Special 40.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll quickly go over why I like it. So I like it simply because, well, first and foremost, I think it looks great. Beyond that, I like the performance because it's like it has a sound that's similar to the Picard S400, but it's quite a bit more colorful and resolving. The treble's going to be more forward, yet still at the same time fairly easy to listen to, as long as you know how to set it up. The mid-range takes on this warm, rich, full-bodied sound. It's not linear, but it's a colorful sounding speaker in the sense that it's warm and easy to listen to like a Picard, but it has a lot more resolution, almost like a KEF speaker. And in some ways, maybe even better than like an R3 Meta at low listening volumes. So for me, if you're in a small room and you don't listen at crazy loud volumes, like say above 85 dB, it is a very, very special, and it's in the name, speaker to listen to. But because of how it projects sound out into the room, I've read a lot of user reviews on it, and some people find it bright, some people find it dull, some people find it too warm, some people find it thin. And I think that's one of the worst things about the Special 40 is when you get a small speaker that's voiced this way and behaves this way, people's experiences are going to be just all over the place with that little speaker. And it is going to be pretty particular about the exact spot you put it in and the kind of gear that you connect to it. But despite all that, I still really like it, man. A lot, actually.
Yeah, I think that I've seen quite a few people have different opinions, like polar opposite opinions, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we came across as well. At the time, we had 3 different speakers that we're comparing. Actually, that comparison is up on my YouTube channel right now, which was the KEF R3, not the Meta, the originals. This was before the Meta was released, like long time ago. And that was the R3 versus the Picard S400 Mark 1. Mark 2 was not even released. And then the Special 40.
Mm-hmm.
So amongst those 3 speakers, I also have to mention that we use different pairings because they all pair differently, with different gear. So we gave the more favorable treatment to each one of them to make sure that they had the favorable kind of amplifier pairing and not just one that worked well with one of the speakers.
Sure.
And out of the 3, I found that with the appropriate amplifiers, the KEF R3 and the Picard S400 Mark 1 had this bombastic bass that was unbelievable from a from a bookshelf speaker that was akin to some floor standards at the time.
Yeah.
And then there was the Special 40, which we hooked it up to the Dynaudio, which is a much more expensive amplifier. And while the high frequency was refined with that amplifier and so on, it just didn't have the bass authority the other 2 speakers had.
Sure.
And to make matters even more complicated, the KEF R3 seemed like a much better value at the time because it was much bigger than the both speakers. That's 400 Mark 1 and
bigger,
the Special
heavier,
40.
all that good stuff. Yeah.
So in that comparison, the Special 40 took a lot of L's, right? Losses in both size and, bass authority and stuff like that. But when it comes to the mid-range and high frequency also, maybe we didn't have the perfect pairing with the Special 40, and that's why we threw the most expensive amplifier we could at it. The Dynaudio was, I believe, like about $20K. So
yeah.
But even despite that, I found that with the Hegel and KEF R3 pairing, I found that the R3 had this, more relaxed, more easier to listen to a high frequency compared to the Special 40. And of course, the Picard S400 Mark 1, that speaker was, a warmish, easy to listen to treble. Some people even call it dark and rolled off.
Sure.
So that was not an issue. Again, this goes back to the time where I was a fan of that warm, even borderline dark sound.
Yeah.
So the Special 40 having least amount of bass authority and extension versus the other 2, and the Special 40 also having the most treble energy versus the other 2, I didn't like it as much as the other 2.
Sure, I
That's
get that.
the conclusion I came to.
And this is funny because I've done this exact comparison, maybe on different electronics, but I've done this exact comparison. And the Mark 1 S400 was such a very special speaker. Specifically the first 200 that were made. I don't think you ever heard that one because Picard, changed that speaker like 3 times during production, like completely changed the sound of it, which
Yeah, I didn't even, I was not even aware of that.
Yeah, it frustrates me even to this day because they made no announcements, right? But the first 200 pair, the original, oh my God, that was really good because the integration between the drivers was spot on. But the reason why they had to change it is because people were listening at louder volumes than expected, and it just didn't work, right? You had to cross over the tweeter higher in order for it to handle that power, with that design. But anyways, going off track here, to me, the Dynaudio Special 40 was like the mix between the two. Like I found that it had as good, if not better, resolution than the KEF, but it had the warmth of the Bacards. And the difference, and here's the key difference here, I hated the sound of the R3, the original R3.
Right, right.
I mean, objectively, it beams in the upper mid-range. The treble sounded forward and very metallic to my ears, like the exact opposite of what sound in real life is just completely artificial hi-fi. It was dynamic, yes, had quick and very strong bass output, yes, but to me that speaker just sounded completely fake. I think the R3 Meta was a very good upgrade at the expense of speed, maybe, but otherwise, I was like, no, the Dynaudio Special 40, yes, it may not have as much bass, but it sounds tonally far more realistic than both of them, while still being pleasant to the ears. It's just going to be more limited in terms of how loud it can get and just how much bass it can deliver. But for someone like me, I'm willing to compromise a lot to get good tone, or what I feel is good tone. And for me, it's like, no, dude, the Special 40 has it all day long over the other two. So, and I feel that way even about S400 Mark II and R3 Meta. So even you take the latest versions and it's like, no, dude, I'd take Special 40 over those any day of the week.
Really?
It's not even close. Not even close.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I would sooner set the other two on fire than.
Yeah, I think the two speakers that you mentioned, the Harbeth P3 SR and the Dynaudio Special 40s, both of those speakers were speakers I was very excited about.
Yeah.
I was like, I think I'm gonna love these speakers. But it ended up being not my favorites.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Now I do want to get, as far as the Special 40, I had it in for review. I had time with it. Like I drew my conclusion. It's not a speaker for me. Whatever, right?
Yep.
But with the Harbeth P3 SR, I do want to get that speaker in eventually in the future. Hopefully, and try it out in my setting, because I was baffling because I was running into problems that nobody else felt the same about, I feel like.
What's interesting about this?
It goes against the measurements. It goes against your impressions.
Yeah.
My friend's impressions. I was hearing the opposite for the first time. I was like, what high frequency detail are you talking about? All I hear is like this haziness, right?
Yeah.
It was weird.
I think getting it in your own environment would be important.
Yeah.
But I think the craziest thing about this is, where you disagree with me on the different products. One, you felt was like, this is way too bright, way too much treble. What is Sean like? He's crazy. Maybe he's deaf, right? With the IOTAVX. And then with the P3 is like, maybe he's deaf because like there's no treble energy here. How can he like this? So I find those contrasts to be very, very interesting. But look, part of the reason why I thought this video would be fun to film, outside of us just getting an opportunity to hash this stuff out, is it highlights that there are so many variables that play into what we hear, right? Mm-hmm. There's the room that we're in. There's how we have the product set up. There's the experience and the data points we have. There's how the kind of music we listen to, how we listen to it, all these different variables that come together that formulate our opinion. And even with two reviewers who have very similar levels of experience with these types of products, there's still situations where we just don't have the same experience and impressions at the end of the day. And there's nothing wrong with it. But it's cool to kind of hash it out and to figure out, well, why is it? Why does that person feel the way they do? And sometimes it's because of setup, and sometimes it's just a matter of taste.
Yeah, I think I can agree on that. And I think a lot of the times where I do even agree with you, right, with Totem Speaker was one, the Totem Hawks, right?
Oh, yeah.
As well as I think the Gershman Studios, right?
Yeah.
I saw a review of those and I was like, where is he coming from? When I had the speakers in, I was like, where is he coming from? And then I get to the part about the setup, which I found very useful with your reviews. And I go, oh, okay, I have a totally different setup going on. So I switched to the setup that you had going on with a shorter stance, especially with the Gershwin and so on.
Yeah.
And then I go, I get where he's coming from, right?
Yeah.
So I think definitely the setup, the different equipment, how we're listening, what we're listening for, our tolerance to high frequency and all these preferences all plays into effect. And at the end of the day, we're gonna have different opinions, but I think for the most part, we kind of have a similar description of the sound. It's just a matter of like, do we actually like that? The conclusion we draw from it.
Yep, that's exactly it. And I know we've said this before in previous videos, so I'm going to repeat myself a bit. But just as somebody who like watches videos or reads reviews, I always think it's important for the consumer, if they're trying to make a purchasing decision, to pay more attention to what's said about the performance of the product. Like, is the treble forward? Is the mid-range going to be thin or warm? Is the bass going to be warm, or is it about speed? Those are the things you want to pay attention to when you're using reviews to make a purchasing decision. And usually I would recommend looking at a bunch of different reviews instead of just one. And you look for that consistency. Hopefully you'll find that consistency in description, because that's going to set the most realistic expectation for you in terms of, if you buy it, what you may run into. It's not a guarantee, but at least provide you with the best opportunity to know what you're getting into. So
yeah, I think that's very important. Absolutely. So that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching the 1 Bit Podcast. This was our episode on disagreeing with each other. So hopefully this provides a little value and some entertainment. And hope to see you guys on our next 1 Bit episode. Until next time.
All right. Peace.
We're driving cars on a Mars tonight. We're blasting